Yeah, thank you. I got so excited from seeing you. It's totally recording now.
All
Woo!
right, great.
It takes teamwork to make the dream work.
Always. Great. So
All
awesome.
right.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, and hopefully we'll get to do some actual live Q&A. It's always tough because we have limited time, and if not, we'll definitely, try to get to questions after like we have from the first session as much as possible, and we can keep working that way too. Since we're trying to get you a lot of, supportive information here for everybody. So, and kind of just like ideas and processes and practices. So, I hopefully many of you or all of you have seen what we did last week. And, if you remember, we framed our whole program up in 3 dimensions of an organization: I, we, and it. And last week was about I, the kind of intrapersonal perspective dimension of each of you individually and your others at your company, how you experience it, right? Your values, your beliefs, your mindset and mental models. So much more that goes into what it takes to be, what it takes to build something like this. And it's of course a massive challenge, and there's so much there, and it's a great journey of a human. And there's nothing like like building a startup that helps you grow. And especially if that's a big part of what you're looking at. And as founders of the kinds of companies that you are, we think it's, Nicole and I agree, it's a critical aspect of it. And today we're going to shift over into the we dimension, because none of us can do anything that we want to really do by ourselves, right? It really takes close partnership with others and teamwork and really shared sense of vision and belief, but also just ability to work together closely, which really is challenging, right? Being a human is hard, as Stuart Butterfield from Slack likes to say, and working with other humans is even harder. And I think it's something that's really worth acknowledging and then looking at as another opportunity, just like the individual aspect of like alignment. And the best organizations have incredible teamwork, amongst them, and clarity, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And so today we're going to have a chance to hear from one of my good friends and clients and company founder we invested in, Drew Austin from Wade and Wendy, here in a second. And then we're going to give you some workshop type of material like we did last time for you all to work through and practice with, and thinking about how you're working or will work with your teams, your co-founders and beyond, to help you really build really an organization that can truly scale without losing its soul through alignment of values, beliefs, integrity of process, commitment, communication, and how you handle conflict. So that's basically the lineup for today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Drew, who's here today, joining us 6 o'clock on his Friday evening in New York City after a very busy week as always. And we'll spend about 10 minutes with Drew so he can give you a little bit of a background, and we can do a Q&A about his story. So Drew, you want to just really quickly introduce Wade and Wendy and give everybody a chance to know you a little bit?
Yep. Hello, everybody. So I'm Drew Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Wade and Wendy. So Wade and Wendy is, so I'll give you a little of my background. I was a recruiter about 10 years ago. I spent some time in doing technology recruiting and so on and so forth. Loved the business, loved the problem space, but I hated the day-to-day job of it. I thought it was very robotic. Fast forward, I've been working on very frontier technologies for the past few years, working on wearable technology, augmented reality, and now artificial intelligence. And I get to apply that back to an industry that I really have a big passion for, which is building teams and helping people find work. So what Wade and Wendy is those are our 2 artificially intelligent recruiters. And what we're really working on is trying to find that niche between the personalization that's required to deliver a quality experience in recruiting and the scalability challenges that people face in recruiting. So we really help with top of the funnel type work. So finding people, helping recruiting teams find the right people by automating a lot of the sourcing efforts, and as well as evaluating and screening applicants through a chat and conversation that our chatbot robots facilitate. So yeah, we're a Series A company. We're based in New York. We just closed our Series A about a week ago, which is pretty cool. And Jeff's been helping me along the way with Evolution and coaching me through this crazy journey. So that's my background.
It's great. So Drew, maybe you can just tell us quickly, so when you founded and what the, kind of founding team or that dynamic was, and then we'll start there and then work our way to today.
Yeah, so I've had no challenges on the no, I'm kidding. Founding teams have been quite an interesting challenge and journey for me. So with my current company, Wade & Wendy, when we started the business, there was 4 of us. It was myself as the CEO, and then I ran around talking to anyone I could get my hands on about this idea, and I recruited 3 other people that I considered part of my founding team. We had a lead engineer, a head of business development, and a head of design. And this was our founding group. And I think what I found early on, and we founded the company about 3 years ago, 2015. So the word founder, the title founder, is a very dangerous title. Because you're the first one there, and because you were, part of the creation phase, it automatically puts a level of responsibility and a responsibility of leadership on your plate that not necessarily everyone is really equipped or prepared or should be responsible for. So we had challenges where the original founding team just didn't gel well together, and we had to make changes. And today I'm the founder and the lone founder left in this company, and we've rebuilt the entire thing since then. And it's a very scary, stressful, challenging situation to go through, but it's a really great learning experience. I think it was for the best.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Drew. Can you? Now, can I ask you to share some more? So can you share a little bit more just about your, some of the specifics from your perspective of the areas of challenge that you found, in the dynamic and with co-founders?
Sure. I mean, there's different phases. So, one is alignment around role and expectations and compensation. And that's right off the bat. You have different equity splits, you have salary splits, you have some splits, you have some people that are taking on more of the work and some people that are sacrificing more. So there's a lot around early expectation setting and clarity around that although you can try to have the conversation, I mean, unless you've really had it and everyone's truly aligned, then a lot of things can go unsaid. Which is dangerous. After the compensation and expectation setting and all of that, there's also this phase, there's an interesting transition that happens between building, when you're just all together hacking away and building something, to hiring people and having people that report to you. So once you start to have people that report to you and you hire people, your role as a founder starts to evolve in unique ways. And that is another transition that can get very messy, that transition between, just building and hacking, because you got 4 people together that all have complementary skill sets that can get an MVP out the door and raise a seed round, to, okay, now we got to build a foundational culture. Do we have alignment on values? Do we have alignment on how we want to, what the foundation should look like upon this team? Do some people want to work remote, full-time, in-house? Like, there's just so many points that you really need to either be aligned with or have clarity around that there's one person who's going to have to say this is how it's going to go, and we're either going to follow suit or we're not. And those are, just things that come up along the way.
Yeah, they really do. And so did you, I know, as you said, it was challenging for you. And I think, by the way, it is for almost every founder and co-founder I work with. And, I learned a lot from working with you when I did in my coaching practice, and how clear I see similar challenges at almost every company I work with. So this is a very common thing. And so I want to acknowledge that. And, but in your case, if, now you've kind of gone through this and you've got a new team here that you've put together, what, if you could name like the specific points, like you talked about, there's the values alignment or beliefs alignment, kind of like how you're working. And then there's another layer around talking about that stuff, I think, right? That in some ways you can decide which one's first. They're both kind of important. How you handle it when there's differences, basically, is my question.
Yeah. I think that we had, right at the get-go, I think it's really important to set expectations up front. So what I tried to do my best was say, like, guys, listen, I'm the CEO here. So like, I'm going to try to take everyone's input and consideration as much as possible. And there are certain pieces of this business where you're going to own, and I'm going to listen to your decision making. But ultimately, I had to kind of set a line of, I need to be able to make a decision in an area that might create tension for the company, and you guys either have to be on board with it, or we have to, or figure out some other way. So there was a lot. The problem with, at least for us, with 4 co-founders, is that there was just so much conversation, so much like, hey, let me, I think I welcomed input almost too much, because I wanted to be democratic, because I wanted everyone to be able to have a say and a voice. I almost welcomed opinions to the point where we got nowhere. We were able to make no decisions. There was just too much back and forth. So, I don't know if I know the answer. I just know what I've experienced and what I could say. Some things didn't work. And I think that I think that just being very, very clear and over transparent in the beginning to make sure that there's alignment, and then confirm alignment, and then make sure that there's alignment on the fact that even what you're saying, you both understand what you mean. Because I'll tell you how many times we both agreed on something and realized we were agreeing on something that neither of us were on the same page of what that actually meant. So, there's just it's over communication in the early days actually is a better investment, because you'll reduce the need to communicate as much as you go forward.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. I mean, my sense, kind of looking back and also looking at you now, Drew, is that, you were, look, like everybody, you had an idea, you were moving fast, you raised money, there was a lot to do. And so like most businesses, the it kind of stuff, getting the product done, getting clients on board, obviously, customers, getting your funding, it takes precedent. And then other stuff is quick. And especially if you're not explicit and then I would say willing to really be, to be checking in regularly and giving time for that kind of like alignment setting, and then willing to raise areas where it feels like it doesn't feel right and kind of have that potential conflict, which a lot of people aren't comfortable with, is to me a really big, kind of opportunity to get clear faster. And then if there's truly misalignment, to resolve it quickly, as opposed to like, how long we're going to sit and try to make this work because we like each other and we like parts of each other, lots of each other, but if it's not working, it's like, that's my experience of what you have to do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Your experience of that too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost, it kind of correlates with like a mindfulness journey, if you will, of like starting with awareness and like being aware of the issue, and then getting to a place where like once you're aware of it, now like how do you either sit and think on it, or do you take an action? Because sit and think, just drains you and distracts you from actually taking any action. And, the ability to take a concrete action is really, there's a set of awareness that you have to.
So yeah, and in your case, again, being sensitive, your general experience, what you learned was about taking that action faster once you realized there was a misalignment, basically.
Yeah, taking the action faster, and also, I took a lot of time. I did take time to like process things a little bit more. So it wasn't about rash decision making. I don't think it's about faster, but it's about being a little bit more clear with trying to see the different perspectives. Trying to look at myself first to make sure that I'm like addressing like what kind of bias could be going into the situation. How am I handling this? Am I responding effectively? Am I creating an environment that people can succeed? And then once I feel comfortable with with everything on my own end, then I can evaluate the decision to say, okay, well, is this still not working? And if this is still not working, then it's time to make a change.
Yeah, and I would say, if you don't mind me sharing, maybe hopefully I'm not oversharing about you, I know you're open, is that what you're just talking about there, your own consciousness, self-awareness, emotional intelligence was really an important piece for you to feel confident about doing the right thing, because you have this real desire to do the right thing and to really be listening to others. And I find this with a lot of the founders I work with, probably most of you out there are kind of similar to this, like you're going to want to, maybe not but really orient towards collaboration and consensus versus like top down, tough decision making. At early stage, it's really potentially dangerous for the business to do this too much. And so knowing yourself as clear as you can be, it's easier. You can do it with confidence. And your journey was about learning about yourself as much as it was about the team. Right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think another big learning experience for me was like, like again, like there's a lot of responsibility on the plate of a CEO. And when I had to rebuild this team from the ground up and rethink this, the first hire I made was actually a chief of staff, which is a very weird hire for a 4-person team at the time, who went from 12 to 4 to rebuild the whole thing. But I really wanted someone who could actually give that, like I had a vision for the culture I wanted, but the ability to execute on the consistency that is required for culture. Like, culture to me is a lot about consistency. To be able to deliver on what you want to be able to build tradition and be able to execute on the things that you set expectations you're going to execute on.
Yeah.
As a CEO, you have a very limited bandwidth. So bringing someone on board who is able to kind of like understand my vision for the culture, but make sure that they can execute the things that were needed to actually like enable people to feel the culture and actually build an environment. I thought culture was very like, hippity dippity before I understood really that if you don't build a strong foundation, then you're building a business on quicksand. And that was one of the big learning experiences that I had.
Very good, Drew. That's awesome. Bless you. I know you're not feeling well, by the way, so I really thank you for making time here, Drew. This was, I hope, a really good intro for this session, and like hearing it live from someone like all of you out there who have gone through, who's been through this and kind of is living to tell the tale, because Drew was able to figure it out soon enough, and then go and bring on a team of other folks who've really been helpful in working together to build the business to where it is today and going forward from here is pretty awesome. And it's hard to do, but it's like that's what you got to do when you're building a company. So yeah, any last words, Drew? Otherwise we can keep going from here.
Am I supposed to answer any of these questions I see on the side?
We don't. I wish we could. We can do it offline and put it back in the Slack so people can hear the answers. Sure. So I'll share them with you. But I feel like I've got to keep moving because I've got a lot of good content for everybody.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. And Drew, you're going to drop off probably, right? So
yeah, I'm going to drop off. But thanks for having me, everybody.
Okay, Drew.
Thanks,
Drew.
More information. I'm happy to.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Good weekend. Great. So Matt, I hear you now. You ready to jump in here?
Yeah, I really like what Drew said, and kind of watching the questions. The co-founder dynamic is the most important one, I think, at an early stage in some ways, and we're always working on it. And Jeff and I spend countless hours together aligning with each other. And in some ways it's just that simple, and especially at a very early stage, I think it's important to keep it simple. And it's also just that difficult because, as we know, being a human is like infinitely complex, and the mechanism that you align with is your communication. And that's where it's, if you have an hour that you spend that is sacred at the beginning of every week, right? Very great kind of best practice with your co-founder that's very spacious, and you can align and check in about how you're individually doing, and then share how your thoughts about the business, and then also hear from them, and then align and kind of around kind of the goals or whatever strategic things are emerging for you. Like that's a great structure. And, in that it's really driven by how well you're listening and how you're speaking to each other and the qualities of both. And for many people, especially when you're focused on the those we level skills take a bit of a back seat. So we're gonna go through, similar to what we did last time, some models and some practices that we think are super helpful. And you'll have an opportunity to see these and encourage you to log the questions. It took us a little longer than probably it will this time, but we'll get to them in channel. So that's really what we're talking about here is aligning with each other and aligning with your co-founder, the we dynamic, and through the art of giving and receiving feedback first. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the team dynamic, the early stage team dynamic, and some ways to optimize that. So this model is called the Johari window. And although it sounds very kind of transpersonal, it's actually because two guys named Joe and Harry put it together. And they use it to describe human consciousness and how there's aspects that we are aware of that others can't see, and there's aspects that we're not aware of that others can see. And the gift of feedback, really what it does is it opens up our window, right? So that we're known to ourselves and others. And especially those things that we can't see in ourselves, that there's these blind spots that we have. And that's where feedback is a gift, because they're shining a light into those areas, saying like, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but when we met with that investor, you took X amount of minutes when we said you were going to take, 2. Or did you notice it seemed like you had a little edge with that engineer, right? And it was like, a lot of times it's like, wow, I didn't realize that. I was really stressed out. Thanks for telling me, right? Open window. Or similarly, you're in your co-founder session and it's like, I'm really struggling right now. I'm feeling super anxious, right? And then the other, as soon as you hear that, your heart opens, you can empathize with the person and maybe support them around why they feel anxious, right? And that's why, when you think about that kind of sharing, it really goes back to what we were talking about at the eye level, which is about self-management and your emotional intelligence and your ability to understand kind of your inner world and your beliefs and your feelings. And, when we talked about reactive behaviors, another lens we look through is this, which is the triangle. And some of you may know it. It's called the Cartman drama triangle. It comes out of abuse situations, and it's now applied to a lot of human systems. And the reason I think we put this one up this week is the dynamic occurs in 2s and 3s, right? And those of you that know, you feel victimized by someone, maybe your co-founder or someone on the team, and you put them in the place of being a persecutor. And it doesn't fix the situation. And in fact, it embeds it, right? You're in a powerless place where someone is doing something to you, similar to what we talked about with powerful, powerless. And we flip, right, when we're hooked. And Cartman's research, he really discovered that there's this fluidity, right, of enabling drama or someone else, right, caretaking them, or feeling victimized, and then victims flipping into persecutors. And it happens in any human system when humans are kind of colliding together. And so the work is to really get off the triangle, right? It's to take an active power if you're feeling victimized, and maybe speak up, right? You're sitting down with your co-founder and speaking up. Or, you're feeling self-righteous, right? And you're like, this is the way it should be. I know exactly how to do this. And the person sitting across from you, and you're about to say it, and you use your technique to stop yourself and give up the right to be right, and suspend maybe, and just be open to what their view is, right? And then, when it really triangulates, it's by empowering others to have a conversation, right? The best thing you can say when, you do have that founding team and somebody comes into and sits next to you and says, I'm having a problem with the other person, sounds like you need to have a conversation with that person, right? So I'll kind of pause here for a second. Jeff, anything you would add around just the essential nature of self-management as a foundation for feedback?
That's it. I mean, I really think, my experience is that it's such a gift to get feedback, and requesting it regularly, and having a relationship that has that kind of trust that I'll get it whenever I really need it, like I do with you in our relationship at Evolution, is like absolutely the secret of our success, right? As we talk about, and it's really about feeling safe that first of all, we all have challenges and we're not perfect. I'm not perfect, you're not. And I want to know when it doesn't feel like it's the best version of me to you. And I can decide whether or not I want to do anything with that. But I need that information to make that decision. Otherwise, I'm going to have my own inferences, and I'm going to start putting it back on you. And then you're going to feel something from me, and we're just going to get ourselves in a knot that's much more hard to untie. And if we're direct and upfront with each other.
Yeah, and I've had to really learn, because I'm like impulse driven, is that like it's good for me to sit, as Drew said, right? And like sleep or meditate or go take a walk and just kind of be in my own process a little bit. And sometimes, I'm not talking necessarily anything like, heavy kind of somatic piece of work, but I'm really talking about like an opinion about something, or a view of like, the way something is occurring. And like, that really helps, right? Is to kind of get off the triangle and be a little bit more objective, and then get into the collision of perspectives, right, on any issue. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Just a couple of quick things before that, right? When we talk about this collision of perspectives, you're not going to go too deep into this, but if you think of, when a message is sent, right, press the button, comes out the mouth, it is layered through content, through power position, through your style and tone, through the emotions there or back, and then lastly, the words used, right? And then similarly is filtered through all of these things. And so it's like every time I look at these, I'm like, well, no wonder it's like as human beings, we're kind of falling all over each other, right? It's a huge setup. And especially when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired or triggered, my filters are all up, and everything is coming through like a prism, like distorted, right? Or I'm communicating and it's not being clear, and I'm kind of communicating out through this like tone that doesn't really match my intent. So it really works to kind of back up, self-manage, and try to get clear, and understand, right, that communication is best when it is clear and empathetic and compassionate. So Jeff, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah. So, how to create greater awareness around perspective is extremely important, because you and I might think we're viewing the world in the same way. We can certainly talk about it if we do as it being similar, but I don't know that for sure. When I'm looking at something, I have my version of the truth and you have yours. And of course, I'm not talking about facts. I'm talking about the inferences and judgments I make based on some piece of data. So that picture shows the idea of all these people who are sightless, they can't see, and they've come across something, and each of them something different that they think is what it is. The person kind of at the back of the elephant grabbing a tail is thinking he's grabbing a rope, right? Somebody touching the side thinks he's touching a wall somewhere. Somebody touching a leg is touching a column, et cetera, et cetera. And so their view is, oh, this is a rope. No, this is a wall. What are you talking about? No, what do you mean? It's a column, right? And it's these perspective differences based on limited, kind of vision and visibility that can really create a lot of perspective here. That is a lot of difference in perspective. And so understanding that I view the world in the way I do through everything we talked about at the B level, right? And especially mental models, but also just limitations in amount of data I have. The combinations of this can really create a whole ladder of inferences, an inference built upon an inference built upon an inference that can really impact how I then speak or show up or take action. And so really understanding this about myself, and also checking in, especially, and understand the other. But this kind of idea of humility of perspective, or ontological humility, as it's also sometimes called, is really, really important to going ahead and starting a powerful conversation or providing a piece of feedback to create new awarenesses of perspective.
Yeah. One time I did an exercise with this where I had people give as many perspectives on a topic as they could, right? And I used, and actually this one didn't really work, well a ton, but I used stuff that was seemingly incontroversial, like why avocados are delicious or not. And amazingly, and I like forced them, I'm like, take as many perspectives on that as you can. And you realize that we're dealing with this kind of prism, and it really is useful to do the reflection and then to practice, a warrior-like clarity and communication, and really to look at it as a practice. And the thing about doing it at an early stage is that it becomes infinitely more important when you're communicating to thousands of people, should your business get to that size, right? Or tens or hundreds. Because you're shaping a cultural narrative at that point, right? And the skills that you learn and hone, you use when you're leading an executive team or giving an all hands, right, in front of all these people. So let's take a look at giving and receiving feedback. I won't read all of these, but you can kind of see them on the screen. Some of these general principles. A lot of times when we're in perspective humility, it's really important to use I statements, right? Because it is the way I see things. And you understand that I'm making a statement about myself. And there's something very powerful about that as well. So the other thing is making it very specific, and talking, as soon as the issue happened, talking about the event. We'll get into this, and the impact of the event, or the action and the impact of the action. and giving it in a way where the person can kind of do something about it, right? So we'll kind of move into some of these, and of course doing a self-check first, but really thinking about, okay, I'm going to sit down and there's something maybe that I'm hesitant to talk about, right? I can kind of use some of these principles to shape my feedback.
And while you're doing that, Matt, maybe I can just jump in and just talk for a second. I just think it's really, normally when we work with our clients around this, we are having a lot of time, and we're doing it in a experiential program where we're going to ask you, and you can do this while we're going through this, is to really start thinking about a conversation you might want to have. And maybe it's not with your co-founder or somebody else on your team. It can be anybody. But like practicing this and grounding this in a real situation, I think is a really important thing, just for you to be thinking about in the back of your head as you're listening to us kind of go through this with you. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, write down some notes, and when you look at the
That's
framework,
a different kind, but yeah, it's the same sort of coloring.
Oops. Hello. Whoever that is, go on mute. So the example I think that Jeff gave is really good. Take some notes, or write down a situation as we go through. I think you'll have an opportunity maybe as we get off to like write it down. In fact, writing down feedback is a good practice. It gets your head on paper. You can kind of see it objectively. It depersonalizes it a little bit, so that's a really good practice. People sometimes in the early days when we did feedback training, and we've done them at many of our clients, we would say, they're like, wow, you're really training a lot about negative feedback. What about positive feedback and strengths-based and appreciation and gratitude? And it's really important to note that the reason we don't do that is because most of the time people struggle with what is deemed negative or developmental feedback. So that's why we orient that way. But certainly we live in an underappreciated culture, and it happens a lot in organizations where people aren't appreciating or mirroring back things people are doing well, and really that is motivation for people. It's kind of money in the bank. So
yeah,
noticing.
Sorry, Matt,
Yeah.
it's not good enough just to say good job or high five. It's like be specific in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. This is kind of, again, one of those simple things, but a really good practice to enculturate with your team is to just say thank you when you receive feedback. It's like, thanks for the feedback. There's actually a great book called Thanks for the Feedback. And it also gives you the time to just pause a little bit, because sometimes if I receive feedback, my initial response might be defensive. And even that little pause, in emotional intelligence, we talk about that creates a gap between stimulus and response. We're like, thanks. Right. And in all situations, if we're thinking of perspective humility, when somebody offers us feedback, there generally is some form of learning in there. There's an opportunity for us to take some kernel of what they said for ourselves. And even if there's some of it that's projection or some of it that doesn't fit for us. And it's okay to ask clarifying questions based on that when you're clear and grounded, right? Because as we all know, that's a kind of a trial attorney reactive pattern, right? To go into kind of interrogation mode, which is really a defense mechanism. Jeff, anything on this one?
No, agreed. It's like that's exactly what happens a lot of times, and so yeah, I have nothing to add. Keep going.
Great. Just again, won't read this one, but it's really important to kind of think, because we come across this all the time, where we're kind of like cleaning up bad feedback that's been given over Slack or emailed, or and understanding that different feedback can be given over Slack. Like if you're giving a feedback of like a piece of the feature, an it level piece of feedback, it's like pretty non-controversial. And certain feedback should be given live and not passing in the hall, and maybe not even with something like a desk in between you. And so just understanding the context that you're in when you're having those conversations. If you're going to do a co-founder session, we'd recommend do it in as comfortable and human as a space as possible, right? That's a metaphor for the kind of conversation that you want to have. And you know, of course, it's really important to have one-on-ones and institute those if you haven't, as we've been saying, one-on-one with your co-founder. But then as you have a team, meeting with every team member for a while, whether it's once a week or every other week, is really important. And then you have bi-directional feedback. Like, what feedback do you have for me? I have some feedback for you. And it norms it in where it's not scary, and you just kind of know, you get the muscle memory that it's a part of our process, right? And you actually kind of learn to enjoy it. And as we say, the holy grail is when peers are giving feedback to each other, and you create that culture of feedback. There's actually a company we knew, they had a mnemonic called feedback. They would just say, as soon as you heard that word, you knew feedback was coming. It was in the culture. So there was this kind of matrix of feedback that was happening all the time, and people loved it. It was a bit of a game. So that is the goal. Okay. Jeff, do you want to kind of answer some of these, or, you know, address maybe? Yep.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And somebody, you know, trying to follow the chat along here, for sure. In the, you know, if somebody's offering you feedback, not only thank you and asking clarifying questions, but 100% active listening is a really powerful tool in that mechanism, because, you know, so what that means is really checking in. So I'm hearing you say this. So you're here, this is how you're seeing me, or when I do this, it feels like that, or this is the impact. Very powerful mechanism, kind of like an add on to the actual thank you, of helping to clarify, helping to make sure the other person really feels heard, is really great. And so that's coming that way. If you have feedback to give to somebody, I definitely think that it can be a dialogue. It does not have to be a structured conversation, which we're going to kind of give you some guidance on how to do, because a lot of time, you know, again, if you have perspective humility, you might not be sure. You might have some inference, and it might be based on some piece of data, but you also might be able to truly, you're not really sure. You don't actually, you have some feedback if the person did what you think that they did, but you might not know they did that. So asking questions, having a dialogue is super valuable. 100%, I think, is part of it. Always should be some kind of dialogue. It should never be just a one-way conversation. And including, you know, so you want me to keep going through these, Matt? I'm happy to.
Anything you want to call out? Yep. Whatever.
Yeah, so I often see people not wanting to give feedback up. I know this is, you know, if you're a co-founder, you're probably not going to have a manager, but you will be probably for others. And so I think for sure, making a space where people can give you feedback is a really valuable thing. And you're gonna have to go out of your way, because most people look to a founder, co-founder, a senior executive as somebody, you know, almost like a father or mother figure for them. And they're going to be a little wary a lot of times to do it. So you have to really go out of your way to ask for it, request it, make the space available for it, respond really effectively to it. Should always be live. You can set it up through, you know, one of our favorite channels like Slack. And if you don't know what sandwich feedback is, don't do it. If you do know, it's basically saying something nice, like, oh, I really love you, but when you do this thing, it really makes me upset. But, you know, it's not so bad, right? That kind of a conversation, it's like, don't do that. Like, you know, give a good reason for why you want to give feedback. Like, I really care about our relationship, and it's important to me that we're aligned, and I don't feel like we are right now. Let me tell you why, right? So.
Yeah, a lot of times people will say, you know, when they get trained in feedback training, it's like, do not do sandwich feedback. And I think the more subtle art is what Jeff said, which is affirming your belief in the other person is really okay, right? Like, I really love our partnership, or, you know, you're really nailing it, and I'm really worried about your pace, right? So there's ways to do it. And I actually think, because, you know, you have to have psychological safety, which is important to create, right? So you've got a bubble around you and the other person. And, but that, you know, you don't want to use or get out of the essential reality of being clear and direct. And most people struggle with that, which is why we err on the side of not doing sandwich feedback.
Exactly. And I think, you know, the big piece here, you know, probably some of you have heard of radical candor, which, you know, I think some of the framing in it is helpful, but it's really important for people to know that, you know, brutal feedback is brutal, right? It's more brutal than anything. the idea here, if the mental model is I'm here to offer you support and I want to be true to my own beliefs. And both of those things can be true. And I really care about you. I also might be wrong, by the way, right? So there's all that humility and care for the other person. And with that, it's pretty hard to be brutal. But it also is possible to then be authentic. And especially if you've got some specific data. And if you don't have that data, and I'll tell you one other thing, and you haven't really looked at yourself and really looked at your part in this, it's going to be hard to do it in a way that's really in the best possible way. So, really thinking about that is the opportunity for how to really create a good piece of feedback and do it carefully. And it takes time, and it's a practice, and it's a practice for a relationship. When Matt and I first started working together, we knew each other well, but we still had to do it working this way together. And it was a little less comfortable, it was like a little messier, I guess I would say. But we fought through it because we knew we had to. We just pushed through, I should say. And now it's very easy for us to do it because we do it a lot. So we're used to it.
Yep. Yeah, it's great. So there's a lot of feedback models, and I think people get a bit attached to them. And our belief is fundamentally they all are essentially saying the same thing. With and that one of the ways is just you separate the data and the judgment, right? The objective and the subject, right? Here's what I saw, right? That behavior that was objective, or this is what happened. And here's my interpretation of that, or here's my feelings, or here's my sense of the impact of that, right? And then maybe there's a request on that. So what we've done is we've kind of like looked at a bunch of feedback models and matrixed them all together and added, some to it. And we kind of offer this, and it's useful to practice. It's useful to write down and model your feedback on this and use something like this with your team. And there's others, if you've read kind of the books, you can use whatever really fits best for you. But for the purposes here, we, offer this one.
Yeah. So, it is a structured, kind of some structure that, as I said, it can be part of a dialogue and a conversation. It doesn't have to be just taking through. That said, there are some circumstances that really need to kind of go through a pattern. And even then, it's really important to be thoughtful and to engage the other person. So what I mean by that is, even if I have some really tough feedback to give to somebody, and I state the purpose about, alignment or whatever else it might be, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to say, so, I'll say, I want to talk to you about this. Does that sound good? Even just ask that question. Okay. Right. Maybe they're a little not sure, but at least I'm engaging in them. I'm not just, certainly not dumping in with a bunch of inferences or judgments. I'm starting with some place of like, hey, I really think it's important. I feel unclear right now. I really want to have a conversation with you to understand where you're coming from on this, or to share with you my experience of something that happened. And then figuring out what the data is that's different from your inferences or judgments is a very important step, and it's very difficult for people. Data are facts, essentially. Now, it could be a fact from my perspective and that the other person doesn't even know about, right? Something I saw or something I heard. And you can question that and say, well, wait, is that really factual? You have to be very, very careful to do your best to be objective in this particular part of it. And the other person might not be aware of that, what I'm calling data. And that's okay, I think, as part of this, right? And then, checking in. Does this feel like, do you remember? Like last week, I sent you an email that said this. Do you remember? Yes, for example, that kind of thing. And then I can get into really the meat of the feedback about how I feel and my judgments, my inferences, the impact on me or others about this data. And really, kind of ask them, and this also, I can really ask a lot of questions in this too. Curious if you were aware of this. Did you recognize maybe, what was your perspective on this? That kind of thing, and have a conversation. And make sure they heard me too, right? And I'm understood. And then lastly, it needs to end some beyond that. It can't just be left off at a place of, these are my inferences. It really needs to be left off instead at a place of like, so now what are we going to do about it? Some new agreement. Maybe it's, we're going to talk again. Maybe it's if this happens again, we're going to have to, make some changes, and we can talk about what those would look like right now, or I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to continue working in the way we are. Those kinds of things, so that there's some real clarity about like what's next here in the conversation and in the relationship. And all of that should be prepared, thought through, considered prior to the conversation by you, with probably writing some down, taking notes, maybe talking to somebody, whether it's a coach or your partner or somebody, getting feedback about how it's landing, really preparing so you're grounded, and also so that you can know your part in this and take ownership wherever it makes sense to. Not to take away from the feedback, which a lot of people have a tendency to do, but really so that you can show, hey, my part in this was maybe I should have talked to you about it before, for example. Or I realized I might have said something different before, and so maybe it was confusing. Whatever it might be that your part is in this. So I'll pause there, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. Another thing we learned in teaching feedback quite a bit, this actually came up at Slack, where we did basically train the whole company in feedback, and back in the day when they, in their first year. Each one of these steps can have a little closed cycle, right? You can have a bunch of Q&A on the data, right? Like, so here's what I saw. And they're like, well, really? But I only saw that twice. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I saw that 3 times. And it's like, oh, okay, all right, we're good, right? Or like that changes the conversation, right? Or you're like, huh, well, we see things differently, right? And I'm still frustrated. Next step in the conversation, right? And here's the impact. I mean, I'm stressed out. I feel like you're not doing what you said you were going to do. That left a bunch of stuff for me. I feel like you're not listening to me. I've asked you a bunch of times. And they're like, well, I feel like I've talked to you and I've asked you a bunch of times. You're like, oh, okay, wow, I didn't realize that. Conversation goes another way. Or, right, you keep going. So, feedback is not a static A to B process. It is fluid. And that is why it's one of our biggest awarenesses, that it really is a dialogue. When you get in a big system, there's this thing called just-in-time feedback, where it's like, you do see somebody in the hall. It's like, hey, I saw that, you put that together. It wasn't clear. That's, I've noticed this pattern. Can you meet, John and get aligned with him? Because I think he's going to help you get more clear. Does that sound good? Got it. Move on. Right. But most of the time, co-founders don't talk to each other like that. Right. Very cyclical, because you care about each other and it's more complex and subtle. So I think, one of the pieces of homework is to practice this, right? Sit down, right? Number 1, create a commitment to have sacred time, right? A one-on-one with your co-founders. 2, to practice a deeper level of dialogue, advocacy and inquiry, listening to them with open ears and open hearts, and speaking in a really clear way, and maybe using this model and practicing it with each other. We'd like you to do that. And if you can do it in the next week and just try it on, if you feel like you have that safety and you've built that kind of container, which we'll talk about briefly in a second, to do that. So Jeff, anything else? Or I think maybe we can move on to team for the last bit.
Yeah, I think I really think, make an effort to find a place. If something is not sitting well with you, if there's something you're worried about the future, you can have a dialogue about really anything that, kind of follows a process like this, where you have some structure to it, because it's going to land a lot more. And I can tell you 100% that your relationship will be improved as a result. Now, maybe you'll find a difference that's going to have, cause a, realize you should go different directions, but way better to find that out sooner than later, right? That's kind of like a big piece. It's not worth trying to hide from these things. It's much better to be direct and upfront and clear. So yeah, let's go on.
Cool. So we're going to take a look, at another we level thing, which is your team. And let's say that you've got a couple of co-founders and you want to hire some people around you, maybe an engineer, maybe somebody that's contract but doing, marketing work. And you pulled together this small team, and or maybe eventually not small. This model that we have in front of you is a roll up of how to align a team. And we read a bunch of the books and used our own kind of experiences. And to kind of talk through it briefly, knowing where you're going and knowing who you need to get there and how you're going to do it, right, is the work, right? You have to have some form of goals that are appropriate for early stage, right? Including something that's provocative, that motivates people. You have to know who your team is and have an established set of operating principles that you align around, behaviors and norms, like how you use Slack, how you communicate, how you give feedback. You have to know what the structure is in terms of roles, even if they're informal roles. Like 20% of my job is going to be ordering office supplies, right? That's part of the structure of the team. Management processes are how you get work done, right? So it's how often you meet. It's what you talk about when you meet. It's the system that you use for the work to manage it, managing work. And then individual development is the conversations you're having with people about how they're doing and how they can improve. So, as the co-founder, these are kind of the 5 questions before I get to the next piece, and you can kind of see these when we distribute the slides. It really is important to think about, like, what is the top of the mountain, and having a point of view on that. And the thing that you quickly realize is, nobody else is thinking about that like you. And maybe people aren't thinking about it at all because they're just cranking and just doing what's immediately in front of them. So taking time for yourself and for your co-founders to say, like, where are we taking this thing? And what's provocative about it? And what does that mean for how we need to shape our work is a really important discussion. Really, where are we going, right? And do you have a vision or compelling purpose for your team, right? Something that is really, really hooky, that inspires them, not like a marketing hook, but like that is really provocative. Because, especially in this community, it should be easy, right? I say that with a bit of a smile, but really saying just what the future looks like and painting that. Who's going with you is also important, right? So you think about, okay, I've got to build this team. I've got to build an early stage team. Given my goals, what do I, who do I need? How do I shift roles and responsibilities? What's the right structure to support this? What advisors do I need to get feedback? Should I hire somebody to do sales right now? Should I not? And then the thing that people forget a lot and then causes problems when you build these people that are going to be foundational people for the team is, what's the culture? Right? Understanding that managing individuals and managing team really has 2 dimensions. There's a business and technical aspect of the job, and then there's all those softer aspects around behaviors and cultural attributes for their role, including collective things, right? Like your values, organizational values that you might define, or your principles, or the archetypes, the symbols, right? That hold sacred who you are. And, if they don't live those, it's not going to scale. And most people, especially moving at light speed, forget that answer for number 2. So it's, one of the things that we advise doing is having a point of view first, and then inputting that with the team and letting them react, or, around, what do we expect around here, right? And how are we going to work together? And just simply answering that question and building more complexity as you grow.
Just Matt,
really
quick on that. Just really quick.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say, like, the last one especially, that's what Drew was talking about. The first one was no problem, really good. Second one, it was forgotten about. It was there was not enough time, right? It wasn't thought about, it wasn't handled, and nobody was wrong or bad. It was just different. And so it can cause equally big problems as the first one not being good enough.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, having a point of view on that and doing some base reading on, these 2 co-founders that Jeff and I read. I mean, this book has now been read by everybody, but it's so foundational. Read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, right? And are adopting some of that, and just understanding the human dynamic and the social dynamic of people working together, and how to align and how to create trust and sustain that, and orchestrating it around, posting on the wall, right? Nailing on the cathedral door, like, these are the things, right? this is who we are, and this is how we're going to work together. And this is a piece of homework that we're going to ask you to do. And if you don't have a early stage team, you just have a co-founder, we'd ask you to go through the exercise now as a point of importance that, relatively soon you may have it. And to at least think about that, given your work, given where you want to go, how are you going to sustain that work through shared norms and behaviors? So that is what we have for you. I don't know, Jeff, if we want to take a couple of questions. We've got just a couple of minutes here. I've been driving, so I haven't really been watching them. So if there's one that kind of stands out to you, maybe you can do it. Otherwise, we'll just end with a short mindfulness practice like we did last time, and see you in our Slack channel.
Somebody asked a question earlier that I thought was a good one that maybe you can answer, which was around how can you be both, use I statements and be impersonal in giving feedback? Like maybe you can tell what you meant by that.
Yeah, I statements and be impersonal in giving feedback.
Yeah, in the feedback link list.
Right. Yep. Yep. I think the more kind of subtle way to say that is depersonalize it as much as possible, meaning, check yourself, right? So, you're not projecting and you're not coming from a reactive place, which includes, owning your perspective, right? Because if I own my perspective, it depersonalizes it a little bit, right? I know that kind of sounds counterintuitive and paradoxical, but it's like, it's not making it as much about them, right? Because I'm owning some of my perspective. And, the other important piece around that is giving feedback about a behavior means I'm not giving feedback about the person's character, right? Or giving feedback about the impact of their work means I'm not giving feedback about their personality.
Mm-hmm.
If I said, you're really reactive, right? Versus what I noticed was, you started, your voice escalated, and what I felt was afraid, right? That immediately the person is not as defensive with that, right? Because I didn't make it about them and I didn't personalize it so much that it activated their defense system.
Yeah. Yep. Very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we're good. Andres,
I love that. Somebody
yeah.
said AA reference. Cool.
Yeah.
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Was
Yeah.
that it? Yeah.
It's an AA reference.
Cool.
I like adding anxious in there. And you added
Anxious.
How I just do a double A. Andreas, you need to just take brutal out of that and you'll be fine. Honesty and directness is a great cultural value. It's not brutal.
You guys are so great. You're just so great. I just want to thank you again for being so amazing, and the skills and love that you're pouring into this community. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's great.
Yes. Yeah, it's our pleasure. So, we love mindfulness and are kind of evangelists of meditative practices. So I would just say in, 30 seconds to just, if you would like and are so moved, to shut your eyes and to go to your breath and allow your awareness to drop down into your body and feel yourself being breathed by this oxygen that is all around you. As you sink into your body and maybe a little bit out of your head, maybe think of someone that you appreciate, that you're in relationship, and maybe you're a co-founder. And think of the quality of that relationship and maybe even something that you want to express to them that is gratitude. Because that's what will sustain you through those difficult times. So one more breath. And come on back. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, or start to your day, or midday, wherever you are.
Great. Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend.